I'm going to do a quick tutorial on how to set up a Floyd rose properly. We're going to do a quick Floyd rose tutorial. So we're going to just go through step by step how to properly set up a Floyd rose, quick and easy. So first off, you just want to remove all your strings. You can cut them, unwind them, whatever you want to do. At the end of your Floyd, you have these Allen key holes here, and this is the mechanism that holds the string into place using these little blocks right here. So to remove the strings, all you need to do is loosen these with a properly sized Allen key, and then these blocks will open up and the strings will be able to pop right out. I also like to remove all the string lockers at the near the nut here, just to make things easier. And you use the same sized Allen key as the back to remove these screws here. The next thing you want to do is just make sure that your truss rod is set the way you want it before a setup. So I usually like to make sure my truss rod's set pretty tight so the neck's nice and straight, because once you put string tension on there, it's going to have a little bit of pullback there. So that's going to put some naturally occurring flex into the truss rod. So I use a notch straight edge. So I'll adjust the truss rod, in this case tighten it, until I can use my notch straight edge and see that there's just the tiniest little gap between the notch straight edge and the wood. That tells me that the truss rod's set nice and tightly. And then once you get the tension on the neck from the strings, it'll just give it ever so little bit of flex there. And that's basically how a setup should look. With the string tension on, you should have a little bit of a gap between your notch straight edge and your fingerboard. And that's just a naturally occurring flex in the truss rod. The next thing I want to do is set my fine tuners. So each one of these fine tuners has a finite amount of distance it can move, either tightening or loosening. So an easy way to do this is just to tighten them all the way down and then count how many turns it takes until you run out of thread. And you want to set these directly in the middle of that. So I'll show you what I mean here. So now these are all tightened down as far as they go. I'm going to go ahead and start to loosen. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 10. So each one of those rotations was about a half a turn. So 10 half turns and I'm at the end of my threads. So now if I go back down 5 half turns, that's going to be right in the middle of where I want to be. This just allows it so once you're set up and you need to fine tune in either direction, you have the same amount of distance. Because if you get to the end of the setup and you don't have any distance to fine tune, you basically have to reset up the whole thing again. So 10 half turns to get to the full threads out. So I'm going to go back 5 now. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So that's right in the middle distance between the threads. That's going to allow me to adjust either way. I'm going to do that for all 6. Now I'm going to be using Ernie Ball 9 Super Slinkies, just what I prefer for a string. You can use whatever gauge you want. The thicker the gauge of strings though, you're going to require more springs in the back because you're going to need more tension. And the lighter gauge string, technically you need less springs in the back. But typically 4 is going to be good for any gauge up to about an 11. From a 9 to 11, you're probably okay with 4 springs. Every Floyd is different, every trem system is different, so you might need more, you might need less, but as a rule, 4 is generally safe. Now there are other ways to do this. This is how I like to do it. I've seen some Floyd roses with the ball end over here on the tuners. I don't like to do it that way, so I'm just going to show you the way that I like to do it. So you're going to take each string at the ball end, and go ahead and unwind the string, and then take your ball end and cut right where the wind starts, past all this stuff by the ball end. So it just looks like the rest of the string. So now that's cut like that. Now I'm going to loosen the screw a little bit, and then I'm going to place the string right between that block and this little notch here that's designated for the string. So what's going to happen is I'm going to put it in there, make sure it's in there all the way to the bottom, and then I'm going to tighten this, and that's going to lock that string into place. Now you don't want to over tighten, because you can squish the string and then they can snap sometimes. So just want to make sure it's firmly in there. So there it is. I'm bottomed out there. I'm going to go ahead and tighten this until it's nice and firm. I'm not going to over tighten. So starting to get some resistance there, and maybe one more half a turn. So yeah, that's, and then you can go ahead and test it too. So I'm pulling on this quite hard and it's not going anywhere. So I'm going to do that for the rest of the strings. Okay, so now that all my strings are locked into place there, I'm going to go ahead and string it up just like a regular guitar. I've got the locking blocks off here, so I'm just going to string it up and tune it up regularly. I'm going to make sure that I go underneath the string tree here, otherwise you're going to have problems. So you want to make sure each string is going under the string tree before you're putting it into the machine heads. And then you want to tune it up. I also want to mention though, even though it's locking here, I like to string these up like a normal guitar. So I usually use 3 fingers to get 2.5 winds on the wound strings. And then once you get down to the G, the B, and the E string, the unwound strings, I use 4 fingers just to get a few more winds on there. So just so you know what I'm doing here. Alright, so this guitar is a little different than the standard Floyd Rose. Typically on a Floyd you'll have this whole part routed out and the bridge will kind of float there, and it'll solely depend on string tension, and that's so you can go either way with the trem. This one only goes one way, but I'm just going to still demonstrate how I normally do it, just so you know if you have the other style or the other way. So what I'm going to do now is these strings are just put on, they're just kind of tightened up to stay where they should be. They're not tuned yet. I'm going to go ahead and take my cavity plate. You can use anything for this, credit card or anything else, something thin and sturdy, just to put underneath the trem, and the tension will hold it into place. So you want to put that there. The next thing you want to do is flip around to the cavity, and these 2 screws here, you want to go ahead and tighten them as far as they will go. Now if you start to strip the screws, I would stop. You can go ahead and tighten those up. Depending on if you're just changing the strings or if you're putting on a new gauge of strings, it's always good just to start with these nice and tight. So go ahead and tighten these as far as they will go. Now with your trem being held in place by whatever you put underneath the back here, you want to make sure it looks nice and level. So here, I'm going to grab this guitar here as an example of how a properly set up trem should look like. So you see how it's just sitting nice and level with the body. It's not up or down. It's kind of just where it needs to be there. That's how you want it to look. So now the next thing you want to do is just tune it up like a regular guitar. I like to do it in playing position because that's going to simulate the most effectively where it's going to be while it's tuned up. So let's go ahead and tune it up in playing position. So you want to tune it up to whatever tuning you're using, whether it's E standard or drop D or drop C, whatever it is, you want to go ahead and tune it to that now. So yeah, go ahead and tune it up. Now keep in mind, this is pretty much where your guitar is going to be at the end result. So you want to make sure it's playing nicely and you're not fretting out anywhere. You might have to adjust the truss rod a little bit depending on your tuning. And then you may have to adjust the height of your Floyd Rose too for action at the back. So Floyd Rose is really easy to adjust the height. You've just got the 2 screws here. Depending on your model, you might have 2 or 3. but you can go ahead and tighten or loosen those to increase or decrease your action. And then so you want to basically get it how you want it right now. So if you're buzzing here, you might want to adjust your truss rod, or if you're a little too high here, you might want to bring it down. So right now is the time where you want to tune it up to how you want it and just make sure everything's playing the way you want it. If you need to adjust your intonation, it's pretty easy to do on a Floyd. There's these little Allen keys right here at the base of the saddle. So all you do is you loosen those, and then you can move your saddle back or forwards to compensate for your intonation. So just loosen those screws and you can move the saddles back and forth if you need to intonate. Alright, once you're happy with how it's playing and it's tuned up to how you want it, the next step is pretty important. You want to stretch the strings. So an easy way to stretch the strings is just to put your guitar down on a bench like so, and then you want to go ahead and pull the strings up, but also bending it horizontally as well. So I'm lifting the strings and bending horizontally. So I'm doing both all along the string, all the way from the bridge to the nut. And then I'm going to do that 3 or 4 times per string. And that's going to stretch out the string beforehand so that when we're adjusting it with the Floyd, it's going to be a lot easier to use the fine tuners because the string's already stretched, and it's going to set everything kind of where it needs to be without having to worry about the strings still needing to stretch. So I'm going to go ahead and do that for each string. Another benefit is to stretching the strings is when you use the tremolo, it's going to stay in tune. If you haven't stretched the strings and you're really using that tremolo, the strings are going to be stretching as you're using it, which is the first time you use your trem, your strings are going to be all out of tune and you're going to have to reset your Floyd. So this is an important step, so take some time doing it. Be a little bit careful when you're down to the unwound strings, because especially if you're using a lighter gauge, too much pressure stretching, you'll break them. So just be a little bit careful. And at this point, if you haven't locked these strings in properly, they're going to fly out. But it's better to happen now rather than once you've got everything back together and you try to use the trem for the first time. So just keep those things in mind. Alright, now that the strings are all stretched, you can go ahead and retune in playing position. At this point you might want to retune and play it a little bit just to make sure everything's staying in tune. And then once you're done that, you can go ahead and put your lockers back on by your nut. Now we're not going to tighten these down the full way. We're just going to get them on but still loose. So alright, put my lockers back on, and they're just threaded in just to the point where will stay in place. I haven't tightened them down at all. This is so I can freely tune at this point without having to worry about the lockers getting in the way. So now what I'm going to do is, in playing position, I'm going to first of all make sure that I'm in tune again. I am, and I do have my plate underneath the trem still. So now all I'm going to do, and we're almost done, is I'm slowly going to loosen these 2 screws in the back. So what's going to happen when I do that is the string tension, when it equals the spring tension in the back, this plate is going to fall out. So you just want to slowly start taking these screws and loosening them until the plate underneath the trem literally falls out. Another way you can gauge of what's happening is if you have a tuner on your headstock, as you slowly loosen those screws, you're going to see you're going to start to detune a little bit. So you're going to go a little bit out of tune. When that starts to happen throughout, that's exactly when that plate's going to fall out, and then your Floyd should be set exactly how it should be. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. Slowly just taking out those screws by loosening them until the plate literally falls out of the trim. Alright, so I did not have far to go, and the plate just fell right out. So at this point, we're very close to being finished. Now, what we want to do now is give it one final check for tuning. So at this point, you should be very close to being in tune. If you're not quite in tune, or if you're pretty out of tune, at this point the best way to get back into tune is just by adjusting the screws in the back. So if you're flat, you want to tighten, and if you're sharp, you want to loosen. And until you're totally in tune on the guitar. Now we want to make sure that the Floyd is still sitting flush, which it should be if you did everything correctly up until this point. And you want to make sure that you are staying very close to being in tune. So once you're in tune and you're happy with how the trim is set, you can go ahead and lock down your locking nuts here. So don't over tighten, just make sure they're nice and firm. Alright, now that everything is locked down, go ahead and try out your guitar. Make sure you're in tune everywhere, make sure you're happy with the action everywhere. You are still able to adjust the truss rod at this point. I just prefer doing it before, because anything you do is going to adjust the tuning, and then it's kind of a pain to get it back into tune perfectly. So you can also adjust your height of your Floyd at this point, but again, you might have to do a little more string adjustments and spring adjustments in the back. But if it gets to the point where it's really out of tune again, you can go ahead and restart. The easiest way to restart it again is just to tighten these screws all the way to the end, put the cover back underneath the trim, and then slowly start to loosen again until you find that sweet spot again. So yeah, at this point, after you lock down the lockers, you basically use the fine tuners in the back by the bridge to tune your guitar. And that's it. It should be so close to being in tune that only slight variations will happen. And you just use those fine tuners to adjust. But yeah, that's going to be it for this tutorial. That's just a quick and easy way to set up a Floyd that's pretty hard to screw up. So thanks for tuning in to Beckler Guitars and Repair. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. And I'm going to have more for you really soon. Thanks a lot.